God for natural disasters. How can we forget the controversy Pat Robertson created when he said Haiti's earthquake and Hurricane Katrina were God's curse? Then recently, there was Michelle Bachmann.
I think Washington, D.C., you'd think by now they'd get the message. An earthquake, a hurricane. Are you listening? The American people have done everything they possibly can. Now it's time for an act of God, and we're getting it.
Okay, she says she was joking, but the discussion has led religious scholar Stephen Prothero to write an op-ed for our CNN Belief blog. He's joining us on the phone from Cape Cod. So, Stephen, you actually write, God is no longer in the whirlwind. So what do you think? Americans as a whole, do they no longer interpret natural disasters as, say, signs of the apocalypse?
Well, I don't think they do so much, and the fact is that people like Robertson and Bachmann are actually in the mainstream in American history. For most of our history, we have interpreted things like earthquakes and hurricanes as messages from God, usually, fingers pointing at us for some sort of sin, political or cultural or otherwise, and that's really shifted to the point where even very conservative Christians feel they have to say that this is a joke when they say it, or they have to pose it in the form of a question, as Pat Robertson did the other day with the crack in the Washington Monument through the earthquake. So I think things have really changed, at least in this arena, with science and religion, where science is really the dominant language in terms of thinking about these events.
So do you think that people are less religious, Stephen, or just more pragmatic?
I don't think we're less religious, but I think that there's, at least in this realm, the power of the theological interpretation of the apocalypse is shrinking. And so we'll pray to God. 95 or more percent of Americans believe in God, and about 75 or 80% are Christians. And those Christians and believers will pray to God for things in their life. Their relationships, their family, things like that. But it's at this macro level of the nation and the supernatural so-called acts of God that I think the explanatory power of theology is going away.
So final question, Stephen. When God does have something to say, how does he or she say it?
Well, I think the way that Americans are hearing God is more through the Bible and then through their own hearts. It's sort of a quieter voice, also through their own pastors and preachers and rabbis. But this sort of loud voice of the whirlwind and the earthquake is something that we're now seeing as really not a voice of God at all, but just stuff happening out there through air pressure and tectonic plates.
Stephen Prothero, it was an interesting .com piece for our Belief blog. Appreciate it. Thanks for calling in.
Thanks for having me.